The Bible reading this morning is from Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 to the end. And it's on page 16 in the Church Bible. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows that she is pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going?" "I am running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility toward all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me," for she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Rohai. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. This is the word of the Lord.
The second reading is on page 729 in the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verses 1 to 4. "But now, this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt for your ransom, Cush and Seba in your stead. Since you are precious and honor in my sight, and because I love you, I will give people in exchange for you, nations in exchange for your life. This is the word of the Lord.
Esther's going to come and lead us this morning. Thank you, Esther, particularly Vulnerable Sunday as well, but thank you so much for leading us this morning.
This is quite tall, isn't it? I'm quite short. That's fine. It's all right. No, that's fine. So Tim has asked me this morning to talk about suffering. Yes. So anyway, but this is such a difficult subject, isn't it? So I just pray that God would help each one of us this morning. The silence we've just shared is really important. All over the country, people from different faiths and cultures, different political views, we stop and remember together. And the first Remembrance Day came following the end of the First World War, which the slogan attached to that war was that it was the war to end all wars. But obviously that's not been the case. Wars continue and suffering persists. What we're remembering during the 2 minutes silence, where exactly our thoughts go, will be different for each of us. But what's important is our solidarity, being in it and remembering together. I feel really inadequate talking about suffering. It's a huge subject and one that needs careful and gentle handling. And what I share with you, I don't say lightly. We all have different experiences of suffering, but most likely we all have similar feelings. Pain, anxiety, confusion, fear, and despair. We feel helpless and hopeless. And no doubt we have lots of questions. How does any of it make sense? We see suffering in other parts of the world, in our own country, in our city. And just down the road, there's been suffering in the attack the other day that Tim mentioned. We're exposed to graphic images of the suffering of others. We see it from a distance, but it's also up close and personal. It's amongst our family and friends, and it happens to us personally. None of us is immune. Suffering is part of life, it's a fact. But it can overwhelm us, and we say, why, Lord? Why? I'd like to share 3 thoughts with you about suffering. And the first comes from our first reading, that God is the one who sees. Hagar has fled from a really difficult situation. She's pregnant and alone out in the desert. And the angel of the Lord has found her and tells her what to do. Go back to your mistress. You're going to have a son, and you must call him Ishmael. And the Lord gave her a promise that she would have numerous descendants. The name Ishmael actually means that God will hear. And following that encounter, Hagar said, "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the God who sees me." And then it was 14 years later that Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac is born. But with Hagar and Ishmael still in their midst, It's not a happy or peaceful household. And so Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away, out into the desert. There they run out of water, and Hagar lays her 14-year-old son down under a bush. She can't bear to watch him die, and alone she waits and sobs. But then she hears a voice. The God who saw her 14 years earlier saw her still. What's the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying. Lift him up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. I think we have an innate sense of justice. We want explanations. Why has this happened? Who's responsible? Who's to blame? Someone else? Maybe we blame ourselves. Often we blame God. The suffering in the world is immense and overwhelming and complicated. On the news, we're warned when horrific and distressing images and words are about to be broadcast. What they're saying is this is horrendous, and you're not going to like it. You might need to turn away. You might need to switch your screen off. We've got limits on our capacity to hear and to watch such things. There's only so much that we can bear. God, who sees and hears everything, does not, he cannot turn away from any suffering. God is infinite and has infinite capacity, full of divine compassion, love, and mercy. God's infiniteness is a concept that we can't grasp. I was really struck by Susie's testimony a few weeks back when she shared how God had given her a dream. And in the dream, her friend was suffering, and so Susie contacted her. And the words Susie used in telling us the story was that her friend realized that her suffering, which had been kept secret, was seen. This wasn't done in a way that humiliated or shamed her friend, but with love, and it brought relief and comfort. We need to know that however hidden our suffering may be, however deep our hurt, however ashamed, confused, guilty, or alone we feel, whatever our questions about it, we're seen. We may never in this life understand the whys of our suffering, but our pain is seen by the God who loves us, who knows us, and who understands us, and who has infinite capacity. All suffering and all pain of all people is seen and held by God. We're going to hand out some strips of red cloth now. So we've got some people coming around and they're going to offer you a strip. Don't panic, this is just for you to hold, okay? I don't want anyone worrying. What are we going to do? I'm just going to invite you just to hold it, that's all. So this cloth represents suffering. Maybe it's your own suffering or pain. It might be the suffering that you're alongside, the suffering of family and friends. Maybe it's the images that you see on TV. Whatever and wherever the suffering is, be it up close and personal or at a distance. As you hold the red cloth, just consider the suffering that concerns you. The second thought that I want to share with you is that Jesus, Emmanuel, is God in solidarity with us. Christ was there in the beginning, way back, even before Genesis. Christ knew mankind and the world into which he would come. He knew how he would be treated and the price he would pay. And yet he still chose to become incarnate and live among us. Philippians 2 says, Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, made himself nothing by taking the nature of a servant. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Jesus, fully human and fully God, was born helpless and vulnerable. God trusted himself into the care of humanity. He came to be in solidarity with us. In the Gospels, we read about Jesus' interactions with all sorts of people. He lived life, he worked, he went to parties, he travelled and shared meals. He had feelings and got emotional, and he needed time out to be alone. He had compassion. Jesus allowed himself to be moved. He cried with Mary and Martha when their brother Lazarus died. Real tears ran down his face. He knew the end of the story, but he still cried because of the pain of loss. Jesus saw and responded to the suffering of those around him. And Jesus wasn't spared his own suffering. He was despised and rejected. He was familiar with pain. He endured physical pain and the humiliation and shame of being stripped, mocked, spat upon. He was horrifically beaten and abused. He was made to carry the cross on which he was crucified, completely naked and vulnerable. The cross was a scandal. It was the method of killing the lowest of the low. Slaves, insurrectionists, and foreigners. Jesus knows exactly what it's like to be human. He wasn't spared any of the hardships that life can throw. Whatever life throws at us, it threw at him 2,000 years ago. Richard Rohr says this: the cross was Jesus' voluntary acceptance of undeserved suffering. Jesus suffers in solidarity with all humanity. He refuses to project his suffering elsewhere or to blame others. The picture on the screen is entitled "The Christian Soul Accepts the Cross." It was painted by an anonymous French artist around 1630. Jesus is the figure in the blue and the Christian soul in white. There's a gaze between the two figures. The eyes of the Christian soul are on Jesus. And Jesus is looking back, encouraging, I'm with you, keep your eyes on me. I know what it's like to carry the cross. I know all the pain, all the suffering, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. I know what it's like to be spat on, insulted, and abused. I know what it is to be vulnerable, weak, helpless, and at the mercy of others. I know what it is to suffer injustice. I know shame. I know fear. I know anger. I know despair. Susan Howard writes this: it makes all the difference to know there's someone else screaming alongside you. And that's the point of the incarnation. God came into the world and screamed alongside us. The last point I'd like to share is about God not justifying suffering, but he wants to redeem it and to heal it. Richard Rohr writes that on the cross, God took the worst thing, the killing of God, and made it into the best thing, the redemption of the world. God is always on the side of suffering, wherever it's found, including the wounded and dying troops on both sides in every kind of war. God is for and loves all people. Wherever suffering is found, there too is God. This doesn't mean forgetting what's happened, covering up, or pretending that everything's fine. It's about God doing a deep work within us. As a young Christian a long time ago, I remember reading the verses from our second reading in Isaiah and thinking, things might get a bit tough and fiery, but I won't burn up, so that's okay. Naive. Fast forward to 2010, and I found myself yelling at God and screaming that I didn't believe those words. They were rubbish and untrue because I was burning. That's what it felt like to me. At the time, I was struggling with grief following the death of Adrian, my husband, and I was in an abusive situation which lasted 5 years. Sooner or later, we may well find ourselves in a place that we can't fix, control, explain, or understand. We're not there willingly. It's a place none of us want to be. But in getting to that place, when we're at the end of ourselves, where do we then go? That's when we're uniquely in the hands of God, because we can't handle it ourselves. And if we allow it, that's where healing and transformation can begin. One Sunday morning a couple of months ago, Tim asked us what superpower we'd want to have and to give others. I was too much of a coward to say what I was thinking, but actually my superpower would be courage. Because it takes immense courage to face our own suffering, and it takes immense courage to walk in solidarity with the suffering of others. There are no quick, easy fixes. Yes, I absolutely believe in miracles and in God's healing power. But we're so complex, and God is about transforming us, redeeming us, and healing us, making us whole, but perhaps is not in the way that we want, anticipate, or expect. So how does it happen? We're all unique in who we are and in our experience of life, but I think there are a few general principles that can help us as we face pain and suffering, and as we try to find our way forward. I've got 5 brief points. Don't panic, they're only short. Okay. So firstly, owning and acknowledging our pain and suffering. We can't seek healing if we don't acknowledge the pain. If we're constantly running away from it, denying it, keeping busy and avoiding it, we don't allow God the opportunity to begin to heal us. The first step is to be real and honest about our pain and suffering, whatever it may be. And the strip of red cloth represents suffering. So I wonder what exactly that means for you. Secondly, opening ourselves to God and inviting the Lord to work in us. Being open to whatever part of us God might want to heal. We're complex, and the Lord knows how the damage was done in our lives and the deep things within us that cause us pain and grief. There are things we might not even be aware of because we've got blind spots. But the Lord knows us and longs to heal our wounds, not just put a plaster over them. This isn't going to be a quick fix. It takes time and patience. God is making us whole, and it continues our whole lifetime. Thirdly, engage with this work and with what God is doing. Keep looking and listening for what the Lord is doing in your life. Staying engaged with it is hard work. At the beginning of 2014, I knew I had a long and hard journey ahead of me in facing the stuff that had happened. I was aware that there were going to be days when I'd had enough and wouldn't want to do it because it was just too hard. But I also used to say, on those days when I don't want to do this journey anymore, I always want to do it. It's about being willing to keep going. Fourthly, be honest in observing the reality of your life. When we're engaging with what God is doing in us, we need to be honest with ourselves. If we can't be honest with ourselves, then we can't be honest with God or anyone else. We don't need to pretend. We can discover new things about ourselves, and perhaps we might also discover that God isn't who we thought. We can find ourselves asking questions, and our beliefs may be challenged. This can be really hard and unsettling, and we need courage to embrace this, because this can also be a time of liberation and growth as we listen and look and respond to God working in us. Finally, it's about being increasingly surrendered to God. This is the work of a lifetime, continuing to seek God, to learn, to grow, to change, to trust him, and to step out and take some risks. God is in the business of transformation. He wants to heal us, to bless us, and to give us abundant life, so that our pain and suffering can mold and shape us. We can become wounded healers rather than letting what's happened in our lives define us, hold us back, and shut us down. This is really about finding treasure. Treasure is mined in the dark places of our lives, and it is really hard, challenging work. But treasures are there for the finding. This has been my experience over the last 10 years. As I look back, God has done so much in my life since my days of my shouting at him that I didn't believe him, and it was all lies and rubbish. Some of you here may remember when I first came to this church back in 2012. And for a year, I crept in as the service was starting, and I ran out as soon as it finished. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't cope because of the pain, the grief, the shame, and the guilt that I carried. What's happened in my life through God's redeeming love and power is shaping me. It's not been easy, it's not been quick, and it is still ongoing. We're all works in progress. The question is, how much are we really prepared to open ourselves to God and to allow the Lord to work in our lives? We're going to hand you out now another piece of cloth. Okay, this time it's white. And this cloth, again, I'm just going to ask you to hold it, is to symbolize our prayer. you'll know what this means for you, what your prayer is. It may be for the Lord to help you have the courage to face your own pain and suffering. It may be for God to redeem what's happened and to heal it. Perhaps it's a prayer for someone else who's suffering. Or it may be a prayer for the world, for peace, for hope. So as we hold these two pieces of cloth, we acknowledge suffering and we offer up our prayers. In a couple of minutes, I am actually going to invite you to come forward and to put your cloths, both of them, the suffering and the prayer, over the cross. Just hang them there. Because remember that on the cross, God took the worst thing, the killing of God, and made it into the best thing, the redemption of the world. There is no person and no pain or suffering that's beyond the Lord's redeeming love. Amen.